Alec, I just want to pick up, before we go to the audience, you mentioned Labour at the end there, and this is the kind of flip side of what's happened to the SNP. And we were discussing this earlier about the issue of Devo Max, which is home rule, however you want to define that. It's now centre stage. But my point always is that you talked about Labour working with the Tories and how toxic that turned out to be. But more than that, my feeling was that they should have gone for Devo Max on their own, without the Tories, anybody else who wanted to fall in behind them like the Liberals, and they should have said, we want Devo Max as a question on the referendum. And that way they could have, tactically, undercut the SNP's position. You would have found it difficult to say no, even if you'd wanted to a second question. And therefore, Labour could technically have, quotes, won the referendum and would certainly not be in the mess they are today, where they're now preaching some form of Devo Max. Did they make a mistake?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's easy in hindsight, but you have to understand the nature of the beast. I wanted Devo Max on the ballot paper. I'm pretty open about that in the book. Initially, because I thought it was possible, and this is not about, not having enthusiasm for Scottish independence. It's a quick exclusive for you. I support Scottish independence. There you go. But no, it's not that. I say in the book, in a conversation with Daffy Wigley, the Plaid Cymru, ex-Plaid Cymru leader, because Daffy, I had a conversation with him in London during the campaign, and Daffy was coming up to help Yes, and he says, what you're really after, he says to me. Because, Daffy thinks I'm just as sleek as he is, it's incredible. But Daffy was convinced that, this was about a manoeuvre, you see. And I said, well, look, Daffy, I'm fond of horse racing, as you've probably heard, right? When I put on an each-way bet, I still want my horse to win. I don't put on an each-way bet if you get money if your horse comes in the first free, but you get more money if your horse comes in first. So just because you place an each-way bet doesn't mean you don't want your horse to win. Of course you want it to win. It's just that you want to make sure you win something. So, similarly, I wanted Devo Max on the ballot paper. And to get Devo Max in the ballot paper, I had to get enough people out with the government to be proposing that. It had to be a genuine proposal for Devo Max. It couldn't, the government couldn't campaign simultaneously for independence and Devo Max, and we were campaigning for independence. So I encouraged, as best I could, that to happen. And there was a number of people who were strong advocates. Ben Thompson, the liberal, economically liberal financier, and a group around him. People in the STUC, the Scottish Trade Union Congress, were in the committee, were very, very favourable. But there wasn't enough of a groundswell. There wasn't a political party who said, yeah, we're going to command to Devo Max. We want the freeway referendum. And therefore, by about 2012, the spring of 2012, I was in a position that I couldn't seriously sustain it as an argument. I can't artificially create it. But then I kept arguing for it. This is slightly sleeker, but the reason I kept arguing for it is I knew the Conservatives, the government, the Westminster government, would do virtually anything to keep it off the ballot paper. Ironic, isn't it? Because that's what they promised in the last week of the campaign. In 2012, David Cameron was so desperate to keep it off the ballot paper, what he promised in September of last year, that he was prepared to concede on everything else. Timing of the referendum, the question. The votes for 16 and 17-year-olds were under the control of the Scottish Parliament. And the reason he wanted the straight yes-no question is his advice, and I know this absolutely, was at that stage, that's the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, that yes would be lucky to get 30% of the vote. 28% actually, I think, was the figure that the Prime Minister was assured about. So I knew that in order to achieve the yes-no from his perspective, that he would concede lots of other things. So the answer to the question is, for the Labour Party, of course they should. Keir Hardie would. Keir Hardie stood in Mid-Lanark in 1888, if I remember correctly, and his platform was 1, home rule, 2, temperance, maybe not quite as popular as it was then, but temperance, and 3rd, socialism. So home rule, temperance, socialism. So many people in the past of the Labour Party and its origins in Scotland, of course, would have seized that moment, but we're not talking about that calibre of people now. And basically, the position is that It wasn't a device, it wasn't a piece of artifice. I wanted the third question. But once the third question was no longer sustainable, and it became a manoeuvre, if you like, it was a highly successful one, because we got the question under the control of the Scottish Parliament, so the question could be asked fair and square. We got the timing under the control of the Parliament so that the people could get a time to mobilise, which is what we needed. Time to get from under 30% to hopefully a majority. And the essential democratic right, trying to make the point about a new country of having votes for 16 and 17-year-olds who have every absolute entitlement to vote, and demonstrated that responsibility in their approach to the referendum campaign.
Right, there's many intelligent Edinburghers here. Any questions, please? Lady at the front. Sorry.
I would just like to ask, obviously, Alex, you've been all around the country during the referendum, which for me actually, just to say, invigorated me politically. I wasn't interested before, shocked at the result, and now I'm so active. It's unbelievable. But from your perspective of going over the country, could you sum up what you think of the Scottish people? Because I'm so inspired with them now actually being active. You must have a huge perspective on that.
That's a great question. I think we're now living in one of the most politically aware, activated countries in the democratic world. People say two things to me since the referendum. They say thank you, and by which they mean not thank you, Alec, but they say thank you for giving us the opportunity to vote on something fundamental, something, as that lad in Dundee said, something worth voting for. And the second thing people say is sorry, by which I don't mean that all of the no people I meet are sorry they voted no. It's more, in most cases, some are. In most cases, it's more, sorry I wasn't able to vote for independence. I didn't feel myself able to vote for it, which of course is what the Yes campaigners, not just the SNP, but the Greens, the Socialists, the Yes campaigners need to focus and concentrate on. It's that why people weren't able. I believe that social democracy and having an ethos which reflected the mainstream of Scottish opinion was the clue to people believing in independence. They want to live in that social democratic society as opposed to the neoliberal nonsense that we've been subjected to from the Tory and Labour parties for the last generation. Now I'm sort of believing it's not just social democracy, it's the social media, which is the clue to independence. Because the other characteristic about the yes-no votes is that most people who get most of their information from the social media voted yes, and most people who get most of their information from the conventional, the old-fashioned media or the BBC voted no. Now, to some extent, that is an age structure, of course. To some extent, it is. But, yeah, I'm really proud to be living in this mobilised nation.
There's a lady in there. Is there a microphone for her? There we are.
Microphone?
Yeah,
Microphone.
Try the mic, just for the sake of the recording, thanks.
I just recently watched the House of Lords debating the Smith Commission proposals for further devolution of Scotland. And no time they've all decided to vote against it. I wonder if you could amuse us with the ancient regime's power over Scotland, or so-called thinking they can have power over us.
Well, I'm going to stand up for this one. I tell this story about a peer of the realm. Someone, incidentally, who's done great service to this nation in the last year or two, but has to still remain nameless. I have no idea if he was present at the House of Lords debate. I suspect he wasn't. But anyway, this peer of the realm, he comes from humble origins in the city of Glasgow and still uses the language of the shipyard. Now, I know this is a mixed audience tonight, so I shall adapt, okay? Anyway, about a year ago, he came out of my office in St Andrew's House, and he says, because I was trying to think during the campaign of ways to present the fear-mongering, the scaremongering, the intimidation, in a way that people could start laughing at it. which is really important in overcoming fear, is for people to laugh at it. So anyway, this peer realm, true story, unlike all the other ones in the book, this is absolutely true, comes into St Andrew's House, and he says to me, he says, you know me, Alec, I'm a unionist to my fingertips. However, if that wee Osborne says one more time that we can't use our own currency, when we invented the Bank of England and just about every other worth inventing, then I'm going to come and join your lot. So, so you shouldn't think that every single peer of the realm thinks in exactly the same way. But there was within that debate and the report which accompanied it, I think if I'm right in saying, chaired by a committee by Lord Lang. Remember him? That ultra-democratic Secretary of State for Scotland, who was given his jotters in Galloway and Nithsdale in 1997 by Alistair Morgan. I knew he was going to get his jotters, incidentally, because I was campaigning with Alistair in a cement factory in Nithsdale in that election. And Matthew Paris of the Times was with us, and Matthew was taking notes as we went along. And I was doing something which I refer to in the book, actually. I was speaking, because Daffy Wigley once told me to, every single person in the factory. So if I go around the factory, I speak to everybody, regardless. Even if they don't want to speak to me, I speak to them. And that time I was with Alistair. There was this guy behind the machine, you see, an engineer, face covered in oil. And I get up to him and he says, I'm voting for your man. I'm voting for Morgan. And I said, oh, that's great. Alistair, come and meet this guy. He says, mind you, he says, in a two-way contest with Ian Lang and Jack the Ripper, this factory would vote Ripper. So, the Ian Lang, Lord Lang, was chairing the committee, which came up with a wonderful phrase, apparently in all sobriety. Although I do think it must have been cooked up in the liquid dungeons of the Palace of Westminster. And that phrase, that immortal phrase, is to say, from the House of Lords, Scotland shouldn't get the Smith Commission, it's fundamentally undemocratic. How dare they propose something that's undemocratic, unlike our magnificent, elevated House of Lords, where people can still get their jotters and have a reincarnation as life after death.
To what extent do you think that the Conservative Party and Labour Party after the election will actually change from first past the post in a Westminster context to proportional representation to try and slow down the SNP? Thank you.
Well, they'd be an hour late. I mean, that was the idea that Donald Dewar had back in 1997. If you remember, that proportional representation, as we actually, I think, know from, if I remember right, a memo from Brian Wilson, wasn't it? I might be wrong about Brian. I'm usually not, but I might be in this case. But anyway, there is a written version which demonstrates that the reason the Labour Party agreed to proportional representation for the Scottish Parliament is they thought it would be impossible, absolutely impossible, for anyone ever to get an overall majority in the Parliament. Great plan. So I think, would they do such a thing in order to try and forestall the SNP? Absolutely. Of course they would. Would it work? No. People tend to find a way of breaking any artificial chains that are in the obstacles to democratic decision making. Funny enough, I just looked, there's a Salvation poll out tonight for the Mirror, and just the Scottish sample, but Even so, it's quite interesting, a question that the SNP's votes at 45%. It seems a kind of magic figure in these days. And I don't think, incidentally, that the 45%, if indeed the SNP get 45%, I mean, it might be a mighty total, and nothing is certain in this world, certainly not certain in politics. And 5 days is well, Harold Wilson said a week was a long time in politics. 45 days is a long, long time. But if we did, then in my estimation, that would not be because every yes voter voted SNP. There will be people who voted no will vote SNP. I've met lots of my constituency, lots of people who vote for me who didn't vote yes. And they'll do it for very good reasons, incidentally. They'll do it because they want to see what they were promised. I mean, in my estimation, the promise, the commitment, the undertaking, the vow that was made to Scotland was hugely influential. Now, I've said this for months, and people say, oh, no, I was always going to vote yes, or I was always going to vote no. And yeah, exactly, yeah, but it wasn't aimed at you. It was aimed at, I can actually picture it. I knew there was going to be a last-minute offer. How did I know there was going to be a last-minute offer? Because that's what they did in Quebec. And Dougie Alexander was gaming on Quebec. In Quebec, even down to non merci. No thanks. Wasn't it subtle? So in Quebec, there was a last-minute offer, so therefore there was going to be a last-minute offer. I'd kind of discounted it because I thought, well, how can you have a credible offer from people with no credibility? Cameron is minus 40, Miliband's minus 60, Clegg is minus 80 in satisfaction. Incidentally, Nicola Sturgeon is the only politician with a positive satisfaction rating in England. Which might be something for them to think about before they start demonising her. I was thinking people with no credibility can't make a credible offer. But of course, they didn't really make the offer. It was Gordon Brown who made the offer. And for reasons I've never been totally able to fathom, under all the circumstances and history of this, Gordon has still an appeal, or had until he announced his resignation, had a certain cachet with a certain group of people, not silly people, incidentally, not silly people in the slightest. I can picture them, older, working-class Scots, not retirement age, but sort of steady folk. And if these people get told, look, here's not a promise, like tuition fees, but a vow, presented in the Daily Record, which says it's centre of its appeal to exactly that sort of person, and you can have home rule, according to the campaigners, Devo to the max, according to the Daily Record, near federalism, according to Gordon Brown, and you don't have to vote yes, then all you require is 1 in 20 to swallow that story. And it's not because they're silly or naive, it's because it is actually, if technically well presented, a believable proposition. Now, the fact that most of us know that they will never concede anything unless they have to, of real substance. And now we know from the Smith Commission and the command paper that they won't concede it. Of course, we know that now. But that's not to discredit people who thought in September that that was a way forward. So I think a lot of people will vote SNP who didn't vote yes. But I hope and believe that the vast majority of the 45% will vote SNP.
How do you handle being unfairly demonised by both the media and Westminster? And a bit more personal, how does your wife handle it as well?
How does my wife handle it? Oh, she loves it. Now, Moira says, Moira, stand up and take a bow. Moira says, fear from the Labour Party that, my goodness, if they're not careful, they'll have to implement social democracy. Oh dear. Well, that would be tragic, wouldn't it? Labour Party's platform, incidentally, is, as far as I can make out, is to continue real terms decreases in public spending. But 10 days ago, the Financial Times said they didn't think this was entirely a good idea, and perhaps there should be a move away from austerity economics given the risk of deflation. We now have a situation where the Labour Party is to the right of the Financial Times. So, Labour Party want more cuts and lots more bombs. What an inspiring platform to take to the people of these islands. So there's a great fear in the hearts of the Labour Party they might get moved on to a more progressive agenda, and that would never, ever do. The Tory Party's fear is a bit different. The Tory Party said last autumn that Scotland should play a full part as an equal partner in the United Kingdom. But when they said that, what they had in mind was a bit part in the United Kingdom. Now it looks like we might be playing a big part, then it's all different. Oh, listen, when we said you were to play a full part, we didn't know you were going to actually influence things. I mean, good God! That would never do. I mean, the very idea, a bit like the House of Lords and its worries about the essential democracy of the Smith Commission, the very idea that a majority of MPs should decide who the Prime Minister is, what an extraordinary concept. Can't have that. And the idea that the swing vote among that majority of MPs might be from Scotland, oof. There'll be doubles all round in the fusion room.
Afraid to stand up because I'm one of those Dondonians who sneaked in tonight. Basically, I've been following what's been said about blocking the Conservative Party out of control. And what I found very interesting was, and forgive me if I'm going off at a tangent here, the fact that the story hasn't been given the clout it deserves by the BBC and other large media corporations. I mean, for instance, I know it was only a story yesterday, but you announcing that you could block out a Tory government has already gone from BBC's homepage, I'm afraid to say. And I just wondered, how do you go about combating such bias when you're losing to nonsense stories like One Direction and Jeremy Clarkson?
Told you.
How do you
Zayn
cope with
has
that?
left One Direction.
I knew that Zayn had left One Direction. I predict it in the book. It's day 62. You realise that comment, if that's on Angry Salmond tonight, then my list of suspects will grow. Firstly, Nicola will deploy her arguments in her own way and do it superbly well. But she will have the opportunity, which can't be denied to her now, in the leadership debate and elsewhere at this party's conference this coming weekend. She'll have the opportunity to speak directly to the people, and Nicola, in my estimation, is somebody who is well able to speak directly. So, and that can't be stopped. It can't be edited. I always loved live interviews for precisely this reason. Anything I could do was straight one-to-one. If we'd relied on the written press in Scotland, then the SNP would still be back with our 3 MPs in 1987. It never was going to be done by the written press. And again, you've got to understand why. I mean, for any newspaper owned in London, they see the SNP as a threat in some way or in substantial way. That's just the way it is. And therefore, when it comes to the SNP, they're not newspapers. Actually, when it comes to lots of things, they're not newspapers. But that's just the way it is. So, there's no point, and that's like the weather. You can moan about it as much as you like, but that doesn't actually affect change. I mean, the change that's happened since the referendum is we at last have a daily newspaper who argues for independence openly and courageously. That's a great change. So hands up folk who buy the National here. All right, hands up folk who didn't. I'll hear a word with you later. That's a good thing. And that's, but you know, the preponderance is still going to be well on the other side. The BBC had a bit of blind spot actually. Stupid of me really, but I had kind of reckoned once we got into the campaign proper that the broadcasting would be straight up. You know, that's you know, there's. And by and large, you know, that's what happened, certainly in the Scottish context, in say, a Scottish election. And that didn't happen, and you know, that was one of the things that I should have seen more clearly in advance. I'm not talking here about individual journalists. I make a real point of pointing out that there were a number of journalists who I hold in the highest regard worked for the BBC. James Cook, for example, first-class journalist. Brian Taylor, exceptional journalist. And the network people, David Dimbleby, you know, first-class mind, first-class. I actually say in the book he should be Director General of the BBC, so as they can reintroduce some other people to journalism. It'd be really quite interesting to have such a change. So it's not individual journalists. What it's about is institutional bias. You know, like in the last weeks of the campaign, you know, the BBC send up the network heavies to reintroduce all of the scare stories which had been done 6 months before in the campaign in Scotland, as if, you know, they'd never happened. I was getting interviewed, you know, as if the second debate with Alistair Darling had never taken place, you know, when, which, you know, basically put to bed the Sterling argument. And then, of course, there was the manipulation by the Treasury, but also the connivance of the BBC of the Royal Bank of Scotland story, which is well detailed in the book. Now, that is not the actions of a public service broadcaster. So, answer your question. What helped us in the referendum? Well, we helped ourselves. The social media campaign was exceptional. The social media represented by all of us, because it's essentially a democratic aspect. It's interactive, but representing also by first-class websites, news promotion like Newsnet Scotland.
Newsnet.scot.
Newsnet.scot. So, and then I bow with the family. Everybody thinks I'm being hard on the BBC. Then have a word with this man who worked for BBC for how long?
25 years.
25 years, man and boy. So that the social media, I think, is hugely important for us. We have the advance of having a paper taking the other point of view. I think we'll get a better deal from the press in the election campaign than we did in the referendum campaign. But you know, we're going to have to do this for ourselves. You know, nobody said it was easy. It's just possible. It can be done. It's not going to be handed to us in a plate. You know, it wouldn't be important if it was handed to us in a plate. So it can be done, but it'll take work, determination, it'll take activity in the social media. It'll need a remarkable number of tweets from the tweeter of the year, Pete Wishart, MP, the tweet Wishart they're calling him now. It'll take a remarkable number of incisive observations from Angry Salmond, and it'll make a remarkable number of social media contributions, and it'll take a huge amount of shoe leather and campaigning round the doors and the streets. But what opportunities Nicola gets, and she will get, she can't be denied direct opportunities, and I'm quite certain she's more than capable of making the points directly.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for your questions. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. You're going to read a bit? I got
I pinched Derek's book for this last reading. I might give him it back, I might know. Right, for all of my political life, I believed in Scottish independence. Since 1997 and the vote to establish a Scottish Parliament, I've believed it to be likely. Since the referendum campaign of this year, I've believed it to be a matter of when, not if. There are a number of situations which could provide the circumstances. There are a number of events which could precipitate the next opportunity. There are a number of variables which can dictate the timing, a timing which ultimately lies in the hands of the people. And that is the point. The yes side lost the vote, but the referendum changed the nation. The people who emerged from the 100 Days campaign are different from those who embarked upon that journey. That changed nation will both create and secure the future opportunities for progress. The means and the procedure are now set. The Scottish people can, if they so wish, at any Scottish election vote for a party or parties who wish to put the issue to the touch once again. After all, everyone deserves a second chance. Every person and every nation. Thank you very much.